It is the 11 Dubcast. I'm Johnny. He's George. How are you guys doing? We're post
You guys.
4th of
It's
July.
just
You
me.
guys. Well, yeah. Well, I'm talking to everybody out there in podcast land and YouTube land.
Then
And
I
I know
will
we have
speak for everybody as the only one that can speak back and say, we're all swell and had a great 4th of
I
July,
think you're a good
right?
representative for everyone who watches this, including my
I am the
mom.
face of the
Yeah, and
masses.
actually only my mom probably, but that's okay. So we got a lot to talk about, a lot of different things to talk about. Again, it's the off season. 4th of July is over. Hope everybody had a great 4th. We're now in the doldrums of summer. We're just sitting on our hands, just anxiously tapping our feet as we wait for fall camp to start. But that doesn't mean there aren't things happening. We got more recruiting news to talk about a little bit. We got conference realignment, which we're going to start with. We got some interesting comments from Slapshot, President Slapshot, about what the athletic department's going to look like in the NIL revenue sharing era. So that should be pretty fun. Let's go ahead and start, though, real quick with that conference realignment. So we do Ask Us Anything, of course, every week. I got a question this week that was specifically about this, but I think it was really, really good timing. This was from Nelson, and just basically a complete rundown of the ACC implosion rumors. um, it's interesting because the ACC, I think, has struggled a lot in this era of big conferences because you've got obviously the Big Ten and the SEC bringing in everybody that they can. The Pac-12, of course, is the main victim of all of this conference realignment. They're now the Pac-2, I think, as of like August. I think August 4th or something like that. And then those two teams, I think the leftovers are it's Oregon State and I think Washington State, right? And they'll be football wise, they're going to be independent essentially, but
Yeah, there's no Pac 12
right,
anymore.
it's gone. Football wise, those two teams I think are going to be absorbed schedule wise into the Mountain West, which is dang, like damn, that hurts. But the ACC is trying to stay relevant, and they've got a crazy television contract that goes, I think, in the 2030s, basically, like 2036 or some crazy thing. And so as a result, it's been hard for teams like Florida State and Clemson to kind of get out under that without paying pretty big penalties. So as a result, the ACC, I think, has done a couple of things. They've tried to make it obviously harder for those two teams to leave. And I know there's a lot of like lawsuits and things like that involved. And simultaneously, they've brought in other athletic departments, universities, kind of into the fold to try to make sure that their viability is still there. So Cal and Stanford, which is really, again, you've got two West Coast teams who are joining the Atlantic Coast Conference. Cal and Stanford are going to be doing that here soon. I guess to buoy the conference's fortunes, they really want to try to stay relevant and solvent, really, as the SEC and the Big Ten kind of just dominate the landscape at this point. But uh, to answer your question, Nelson, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of moving parts. The ACC is trying to stay, at least in the conversation as a football or collegiate sports power. But I do think that there's a lot of effort on the part of specifically Florida State and Clemson to get the hell out of there if they can. But that's not it. I mean, there's a ton more going on. But before I talk about that conference expansion in general, George, how much of this do you think actually matters? Because at this point, I feel like the way conference realignment has kind of progressed, it's pushed so far beyond the point where there's any kind of coherency, like in terms of regional conferences and things like that. I think we're so far beyond that at this point that like Stanford joining the ACC does not even make me like bat an eye. Like it feels completely normal at this point. Does it matter to you? Does it still matter to you that these conferences retain kind of this regional identity, or are we beyond that for you?
Oh, it's like we talked a few weeks ago in terms of, it's eluding me what it was specifically, but we spoke about how the powers that be are testing in terms of what is acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
like, and then using that as the new barometer for just like shoving change through.
Right.
I think that was when we were discussing like sponsorships relative to selling out the name brands of these conferences.
Hmm.
I mean, that's I no, it doesn't matter to me at this point because they've already, thrown out the regional flair of the sport in favor of just trying to create what is effectively going to be a power four. And the Big 12, on to be honest, like, they're it's funny that now you can kind of look at it as, what is the more ridiculous predicament, that the ACC has California and Stanford in
Hmm.
it, or that the Big 10 is now 18 schools? It's like, neither, no, two of the Power Four are completely inappropriately named at this
Right.
point, and the Big 12 is adding schools as well, and is going to get well beyond that 12 number. So they said, you know what? I mean, even if we're going to be, I mean, they like, just slap a sponsor in our conference name, and then maybe we can change the number or keep it at 12.
Hmm.
But they have at least recognized that the brand value for the conference name itself doesn't really matter as much as what the brand value could potentially be if they sold out the rights.
Right.
And so I think that's part of the reason why we spoke a few weeks ago about how this is, don't be surprised if there are other conferences that go down the same route. If the Big Ten ends up becoming the Rotel 10. I actually started, I did for this week's question about a month ago. Like, I asked, what would you want to rebrand the Big Ten as, and there were some great answers. I think I got. Uh, I want to look up a few of them now. I know the Pornhub 10 was one, that was an interesting suggestion. Somebody suggested the Bucky's 10,
Okay.
which was funny because I actually went to Bucky's for the first time a couple like very shortly afterwards, and I enjoyed that very
Hmm.
much. Um, I'll get to a few more of them in a sec, but my main point is, like, I think that as you keep getting into this expansion where people continue to recognize, like, the way that conferences are named right now is ridiculous
Right.
relative to what their members actually are, you're probably going to see more schools or conferences rather following the trend that the Big 12 started. But that whole conversation we had before was, they're just going out as far on a limb as they can relative to saying, if we can slap a sponsor on the conference name, then we can basically sponsor whatever we want in this sport. It's kind of the same thing in terms of this expansion thing. If we're putting Cal in the Atlantic Coastal Conference, I mean, there's really no limit to who we can squeeze into the Big Four. And so the consolidation is going to continue. And I don't necessarily like it, but again, I'm already in a position of acceptance relative to all the other ridiculous stuff that has happened. So
Right.
it doesn't, emotionally, I'm very resigned, and I can just kind of see the trajectory of how things are going. But it just kind of is what it is. I will say it is funny that, relative to what you were talking about with all this ACC controversy. Obviously ESPN has a very vested stake in that conference, and I think a
Hmm.
lot of it has to do with them buying in based on the success that Clemson was supposed to be. And now, not only has Clemson fallen from grace somewhat, but they, along with Florida State, are also potentially looking to get out of there and potentially go somewhere
Right.
else. So very very, very funny developments surrounding that. And, as Ohio State fans, we can only wish the worst upon ESPN as the great media wars
Well,
continue.
and now, I mean, Ohio State and the Big Ten in general doesn't have to worry about ESPN at all, right? Because it's not even part of the landscape of broadcasting for them. So it's not something they have to even, that's I don't it's it's like Mad Men. It's like, I don't think about you at all. Um Not that, that's gonna stop Ohio State fans from from hating everything that ESPN does whenever they say a bad word about Ohio State. But here's what I'll say. So conference realignment in general is pretty bonkers. The Pac-12, as we said, has imploded. The Big 12 is kind of, picked at their remains to try to stay solvent themselves. for reasons that I will get into after I explain that Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah are now they're now the Big 12, baby. They're there to keep it viable and going. Good for them. And then of course, though, we had the additions of Oregon, UCLA, USC, and Washington are now in the Big Ten. But as far as the Big 12 goes, the biggest news probably was, of course, the transfer of or excuse me, Oklahoma and Texas to the SEC, and you know, culturally, I think the SEC has a more cohesive identity probably than any other conference. I mean, they've basically made no bones about being like, it's the Southeastern Conference. That's what the SEC stands for, but it's really the Southern, like yeehaw, like Mason Dixon line legacy kind of thing conference. Like they're the South, right? They represent the quote unquote South.
The
Yeah,
South.
and teams that fit into that culturally, that's who they're looking for. Now they have a lot of brands to choose from, and I don't know. I mean, if they go after,
They would be a more appropriate Bucky's 10, I think,
I
than the
think they'd
Big
be the
10.
Piggly Wiggly conference is what I really think they should go after. But they can add more. If they're able to get Florida State or Clemson, those will obviously be pretty logical additions to that conference. Even Miami, right? If the ACC completely implodes, they're still teams that they could add. But for them, I feel like it's always felt very logical because you have this kind of cohesive Southern identity that even Oklahoma has been. Oklahoma and Texas were the preeminent Big 12 teams, but that's not to me that's not as crazy a stretch as Stanford and Cal going to the ACC. You know what I mean? This is a very logical lateral move for those two teams, and it definitely raises the profile of the SEC. I am really interested though, like the thing about the SEC expanding and adding those teams, and maybe there's a carrying capacity that conference has, but part of it also has been like exclusivity. And what I mean by that is like the SEC for a long time, I think, was like, this is the best conference because it has these great teams. I'm not saying it wasn't the best conference for most of the last 20 years because I think it has been, but also they were playing themselves. And so it's like, okay, well, you've got this top heavy conference with 4 or 5 programs that are really, really good. And then all of the other conferences, or excuse me, all the other teams within the conference kind of get elevated in profile by just default, right? And so that helped the entire conference, and it was this feedback loop where it's like, okay, well, it's super hard to win in the SEC. It's like, not every
Yeah, to
playing
your
Vanderbilt.
point of, being synonymous in terms of Southern
Yeah,
identity relative to the
correct.
conference itself, they lean into the incestuous
Yeah, yeah,
nature,
yeah.
and that tends to pay
Exactly.
dividends for them.
I like that you use the word incestuous nature. That's perfect. Anyway, so my point is that when you add Oklahoma and Texas, I feel like that almost kind of takes away from that a little bit because if those two teams start having success, it's like, well, maybe it's not necessarily like the fact that it just means more or something like that. Maybe you just had a couple of really good programs and basically those can exist anywhere. So I think it does water down the brand, at least in the sense of having this like obvious stranglehold on excellence in college football a little bit. Because people have seen tech. Like, here's my point: if people see Texas and go into the SEC, and Texas has success, right? Texas looks good. Well, Texas has been better the past few years, but I don't think anybody would count them as one of the like 2 or 3 best programs in the country. And the same thing with Oklahoma. So if those teams go in and they have success, I almost feel like that decreases the profile of the SEC a little bit. Whereas you just had a Big Ten national champion, right? And then if Oregon, because Oregon is getting all of this crazy publicity, they are super highly ranked to start the season. They're bringing in big time recruits because Nike is going all in on NIL. I think that changes the landscape a little bit. So to me, what I'm saying, I guess my overall point with all this is that there are unintended kind of knock-on consequences from these giant mega conferences that people don't quite anticipate or understand yet. And I'm just hoping that the Mountain West ends up emerging as the greatest victor in all this as they reel off 5 straight national championships. So
Well, I think one of the big things overlooked in the Texas Oklahoma SEC merger is that, I mean, the power balance in that conference, I mean, the rise of Georgia kind of has saved the SEC identity in recent
One
years
hundred
because it's
percent,
basically been all SEC
one
West.
hundred
And
percent.
I mean, where do you think Texas and Oklahoma are going?
I
I mean,
yeah.
granted, we've totally
Yeah,
thrown
yeah, who
out
cares, right? Yeah,
directional,
it'll go
like,
wherever they think
yeah,
makes yeah,
responsibility
yeah,
relative to structuring these. So
right.
yeah, let's put Oklahoma in the SEC East. But I mean,
But I understand what you're
realistically,
saying.
that's
Yeah,
not going to happen. So
right.
right. So the power balance, although it had swung back a little bit because of Georgia's rise in recent years, you've still just added two very prominent college football
Hmm.
programs to what was already a very Western heavy
Right.
conference, where now, I mean, I don't think that they're necessarily going to have the opportunity to, you know, I, I don't want to go as far as to say humiliate the conference in their addition, but it's going to be, it would be a tall task for them to supplant the other established
Right.
programs that are in the western half of that conference, even in wake of Nick Saban retiring from Alabama.
Well, and that's going to be
Um,
really interesting too in terms of the power shift in the SEC because I mean Georgia's set and they'll be very good for a long time. But I mean, you don't know how it's going to work out at Alabama. It could be great. It could be totally fine. They could keep rolling, or they could take a step back. They could take 3 step backs. I mean, there's it really is more than any other level of football. Honestly, it really is about coaching at the college level, and it's like, you know, you get a bad hire that sets you back 5 to 7 years. Like you got to figure out it's not just like a bad hire for how long that coach is there. It's a bad hire for however long his assistants are there, his recruits that maybe didn't pan out, all that stuff. It can really hurt you if you hire the wrong dude. I think DeBoer is probably the right guy for Bama, but like I don't know. I mean, maybe not. I mean, I think once
Steve Sarkisian taking over the SEC West in wake of Nick Saban's retirement would be extremely
it
funny.
would be hilarious. But do you see that happening? Like that's the other thing. Do you think it'll happen? Like I don't know how sustainable it is in Texas either. I mean, maybe it
They just made the college football
they sure
playoff.
did. And, maybe that's something that they'll keep going after, yours and everybody's is gone, but like
They should have beaten Alabama 2 seasons
right.
ago. They got screwed over on that terrible safety call.
That's I vaguely remember that one. I don't remember exactly the
Yeah,
context
yeah,
of that.
it's crazy. Their history's written by the winners, and most
Right.
people forget it. I mean, that would have totally screwed up another run for Alabama.
Right.
Although I don't know if they ended up making the playoff or not. I think they did, but that was something that kind of saved their season in the infancy.
Right. The other
Anyway,
thing,
real quick,
yeah.
I want to get off these other brand name
Oh yeah,
suggestions for the
please.
Big Ten.
Yes.
Um, so there was the Rolex 10. A lot of people are confused whether it should be called the 10 or the 18.
Oh no, you should definitely keep 10 because
So
it's much funnier that way.
you should keep 10.
Yeah.
Okay. The Trojan Magnum Big 10.
Okay.
Uh, the GoFundMe Big 10, which I think, given current times, is pretty
The
appropriate.
Patreon 10.
Yeah. The Big Ass Fans 10, which Big Ass Fans is a company that would be pretty fun. Or Big Ten Football, brought to you by Big Ass Fans, which also works. The White Castle
All right.
10, Raising Cane's 10. But my favorite was the one that was at the end of the thread, although I'm going to reword it a little bit. There was the Victoria's Secret Big, but I think calling it Victoria's Big Secret would be much better. So let's go with Victoria's
Victoria's
Big
Big
Secret,
Secret.
and
Yes.
then we'll figure out how to rebrand. We'll call it
B1G Secret.
the Bucky's SEC and
Yeah.
the Allstate 12,
Oh yeah.
and then we'll figure out what to do for the ACC that satisfies both the East Coast and the people in Cal and
That's
Stanford.
pretty good. I love that. Yeah, no, the Victoria's Big Secret.
That's my favorite.
That's the best one. That is very good. I like that a lot. Yeah, man. I think all of this is super weird. It's interesting how much of it's going down in just a few weeks. The last thing I want to talk about with this, I do have to mention Greg Sankey, um, who, if you're not familiar with Greg Sankey, commissioner of the SEC, was asked about the horns down the horns down sign? Is it like it's like this, right? Or like this? I don't know.
It's being no, it's you had it right.
Okay, like this.
It's hook
Yeah,
'em
hook
but
him and then
reverse,
horns
yeah.
down. He was asked about
Right.
whether that'll be a penalty. He's like, I'm not going to talk about that. Well, you should definitely talk about it because the more people talk about
It's
it, the
being
more
treated
embarrassing
like
it
a
is.
slur now, which is absolutely
Yeah,
ridiculous.
and Texas fans will tell you up and down like they don't care. First of all, they 100% care. The other thing is that um the fact that the Big 12 even considered making it like a taunting penalty is the most like Charmin soft thing I've ever heard of in college football. It is so freaking funny. And now you're going into the SEC where it's going to happen 100% of the time. Like every single game, every single time Texas gets scored on, it's going to be horns down, and they're going to be begging somebody to give them a flag or to fine them or do some kind of thing for that. And it's because they care about it so much. And I am so looking forward to that. So that clash of cultures is the kind of thing that I actually think I'll enjoy about all of this conference realignment. Like people not really realizing what they're getting themselves into. And I think you're going to see a lot of that this coming season. So that's what I'm excited about. I definitely want to
That first
see.
game against A&M is going to be
Oh
so
my
funny.
god, that's gonna be insane. I mean, A&M is insane to begin with, but the fact that they now have an excuse to, like, make it personal and they can go ahead like, I've seen a lot of, Aggies fans talk about how, like, Texas followed them into the SEC, it's like, we're just paving the way for you guys because 'cause you're weak and babies and blah, blah. It's gonna be epic. I'm really excited about that. So that'll be fun. That'll be interesting at least. And I know a lot of people who bemoan conference realignment. They make some good points. I get it. I understand that it's not all like roses, but I do think there's some opportunity for some hilarity, which is really what college football is all about, right? It's all about the ridiculousness. I want to.
I do think the one other thing that we have to talk about on this
Oh yeah,
subject is the kind of understated storyline of Army
yeah, that's weird.
uh, relieving itself of its independence to join the American Athletic
What,
Conference.
what? Like I have not understood. I know I read like a press release about it, and they're like, "Oh, we're so happy." Like I don't understand what the impetus behind that is. Like, doesn't Army have the entire the entire defense
I mean, I
budget?
always thought it was curious that the Air Force is in the Mountain West Conference and wasn't independent along
Right.
with the other military academies.
That
So it's not like this is without
no.
precedent, but it is just curious. I more so think it's very funny that, the Army is willing to, remove the independent label from itself, but
Right.
a school like Notre Dame is still
Oh
choosing
yeah.
to,
Well, they
even
got to
though
be special little
even though they're
snowflakes.
kind of tied to the ACC now
Right.
and whatever, it's still like, how much money are you leaving on the table by not scheduling these annual rivalry games with all these Big Ten
That's a great
schools that hate
question.
you so that you can
Um,
just keep playing your cream puff schedule?
you would think Army would be like the king of NIL because they've got like, what, $780 billion to work with. Like I feel like they should be able to just get the best
To
all
just
the,
siphon from the defense budget.
yeah, just siphon from aren't they
Yeah.
able to? Isn't it all defense budget? It's got to be all like there's no separate financial backing, right? It's a military institution, so shouldn't they just be like, look, can you give us maybe, a cool billion for you spend $1 billion on one F-35, right? Like give us half
That
that
doesn't
for
even
NIL.
work.
We'll be the best football. Like,
Yeah.
Army had the best football team in the country in the 1940s. You know why? Because World War II was going on, and everybody had to be on as part of Army. So why can't they just do that again? Just have a financial incentive. I think they can do it. They got their NIL budgets should be miles above anybody else's. So I would look forward to that day where they just they bribe kids. Your sign-on bonus is $50 million.
I just hope the Navy follows suit soon and joins a conference too, because then if you had like told me as a kid that all three military academies would be in college football conferences before Notre Dame, there's no way I would have believed
Oh
you.
yeah,
But
right. Yeah, that would
here
be
we are.
ridiculous. But they're stubborn, and they'll never join a conference. They got to be special.
Oh, and the other thing we got to mention is that there's new blood in the MAC.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah,
to the
which
chagrin of Johnny,
yeah,
who believes it should be in pure blood
yeah,
Ohioism
yeah, yeah,
for
yeah.
Max.
Yeah, Maction should be like, I mean, how many teams in the MAC are Ohio teams? It's got to be like 2/3, right?
And then the rest are just Michigan
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They're all
and
all the
Ball
directional.
State.
It's all the directional Michigan schools, and then just Ohio. I'm pulling this up right now. Okay,
There's Ball State, Northern Illinois.
yeah. So of the
Yeah,
12 teams in the MAC, well, they're adding UMass, which boo, I don't like that.
yes.
But of the current teams in the MAC, it's Ohio, Indiana, Ohio, New York, Michigan, Michigan, Ohio, Ohio, Illinois, Ohio, Ohio, Michigan. So like half the teams are Ohio teams. And then you've got, of course, like I said, the directional Michigans. You got the Buffalo and Northern Illinois and whatnot. But like that's an Ohio
How has
conference.
Navy, with Buffalo already setting the precedent, how has Navy not joined the
They
the
would,
MAC?
you know what? That's the other thing though. They
They
would be a
would
perfect.
destroy that
That's what I'm saying. They would
conference.
be a perfect fit for Mac. Like that, because they have to be goofy, and all their kids have to be under like what, like 6'6". Like nobody can be tall. Like you have to be short to be at Navy because you got to fit on their submarines or whatever. Like no, that they would be a perfect fit for Mac. I think that would be awesome. UMass, get the hell out of here. But everybody else, you can stay. You're the coolest conference. You're the only good conference left.
It's such a obscure. I don't know. Like UMass has not been good. I don't know why they think going to the MAC is going to help them.
I think if you looked at like the
They're going to
worst
suffer.
programs,
That conference is going to make them
yeah.
suffer.
If you look at the worst programs over the past like 50 years, I think UMass has to be the worst college football program in the country. Like it just in terms of like how they've performed, even relative to like their their peers. Like they've
What happens when the worst college football program in the country goes to the worst college football conference in the
no,
country?
you take that back. They are not the worst. They are at least the
Rob
fourth.
Schneider stars in UMass Holes,
uh,
rated PG
yeah.
13.
Uh, straight to video. Uh,
Because nobody's watching.
that's right. $22.95 on Amazon Prime. All right, so that's conference realignment. A couple things. So we're gonna do Ask Us Anything. I do want to mention briefly before we get into that, though. We've got some recruiting stuff. All right, and we've been talking about football recruiting, which that's important. 5-star Riley Pettijohn coming in. James Laurinaitis pulling a dude out of Texas. People are super salty about that down south. I'm happy about that. 5-star linebacker, number 4 linebacker in the class. People who are like a little concerned that this was, maybe not a whole lot of linebacker talent in this 2025 class. Well, now you got a huge one there, so that's a big deal. That's great. And then also we got some basketball commitments, or well, a basketball commitment to kind of talk about. Dorian Jones, 4-star out of Cleveland. Ohio's got a decent amount of 2025 talent, and look, you're not going to make and break Jake Diebler's tenure off of one recruiting class. I mean, there's a lot more work that he needs to get done to kind of prove that he's the guy for this job. I mean, yes, he had a great end to last season, but now the work really starts. But that's good. I mean, some of the moves that he's made, some of the transfer stuff didn't work out. Some of it was pretty good, but this is a guy who I think will help pretty quickly. And yeah, that's a great get on Diebler's part. Also, congrats to Diebler for having a kid. So dang, he's had a pretty productive few days here. I'm excited about that. So congrats to
That's
him.
one way to word it.
Well, I mean, he probably didn't do a whole lot of that work in producing the child in the past few days. That's probably more on his wife, but either way, pretty successful week or so. I think that's pretty good for him. So good on him for getting all that done. How much? Let me ask you this. This is just real quick. Do you think Jake Diebler, does he have to recruit at a super high level, or is this a guy who you think can get it done and the transfer portal developing the guys that they have in the next like year or two? Do you think in other words, do you think Jake Diebler is going to be able to live up to his expectations with what he has recruiting well, but not like out of this world, transfer well, but not great all the time? Or does he have to really be like gangbusters from the word go and do like, Brian Hartline type recruiting? Like,
Yeah, yeah, no, he has to do. I mean, the level of scrutiny on him is extremely
yeah,
high. Like that, not because I want it to be, not because I'm a hater or
but you are a hater.
eternally perennially pessimistic. That's just the reality of when of the landscape of hiring this guy who, there were presumably not necessarily better, but more qualified
Yeah,
candidates out there
more
than this
proven
guy who
candidates.
was promoted in wake of firing someone that was given an 8-figure settlement to leave the job.
Right.
Now you say, okay, this guy that was really just originally there to plug the leaks in the dam for the rest of the season is going to be the captain of the ship going
Hmm.
forward. The level of scrutiny is going to be incredibly high on everything. And so we've already been kind of, especially given who Michigan hired and the amount of success that he has had with the transfer portal up in Ann Arbor this offseason. And, the guy that they just got, Dorian Jones, had Michigan on his short list
Hmm.
too. So this was an important recruiting win for Ohio State that they got that I think does bode well for them being able to retain the in-state talent that is not only in this class but also in the some of the classes in the
26,
following
27 is
years.
going to be huge.
I thought it was interesting that he was able to secure a 2026 commitment before a 2025 one, but obviously we know there's, some alignment with the overall Johnson family on that, so
Hmm.
not necessarily totally a
Right.
surprise. But it's important for him to do well everywhere. But the other thing that I think raises the level of scrutiny even more is that we've been talking all season in wake of the fact that the Ohio State didn't necessarily solve all of the problems in terms of outgoing talent relative to areas of need on the team, the most prominent of which is three-point shooting. And when probed about this, Diebler has been for like just very blunt about the way we have to address that is just through developing the talent that we have and the guys that are coming
Right.
in. So
Which doesn't
the level of
inspire a ton of
scrutiny on,
confidence.
well, not well, get I'm trying not to focus on that because I already am,
Yeah,
expressing a
yeah, yeah.
lot
No,
of
but
like,
I get what you're saying. I get what you're
there's
saying.
scrutiny,
Right.
but right, it's important for him to do well just because it's not only the climate around him, but also when you give an answer like that, saying, "Yeah, we just got to work with what we have and develop the guys that we
Then you
have."
better do that.
You're right. You're putting the scrutiny on yourself to be able to develop that
Hmm.
talent. So I'll give him the benefit of the doubt because he got more out of more players on Ohio State's roster last year than I think Holtman did. So he showed a good job in doing that.
Hmm.
But he's going to need to rely on recruits that he didn't necessarily go out and pick out and choose. I mean, I know he had a role in, attracting talent to the team, but he wasn't the guy running the show at that point. So it's not like you can say he's officially had his own first recruiting class yet. He's still going to be working with guys that were planning to come in under the Holtman regime to, you know, grow them up as 3-point shooters and kind of address the spacing issues that this team is presumably going to be facing if they don't address those gaps. So, yeah, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt because it's early enough, but it's going to go away pretty quickly, not just from me, but from fans and everybody else watching that has a vested interest in Ohio State basketball. If that's not apparent quickly, that the 3-point shooting gap that is the massive gap being left in wake of a lot of the outgoing talent from the past season isn't
Yeah.
addressed. So the level of scrutiny on him is incredibly high, and it's incredibly high in a way that you don't even really know how long of a runway he's going to have. If he fumbles his first 2 seasons, the narrative is going to be right there for Ross Bjork to say, "Well, now I want to go higher." Like, Gene Smith had input on the last thing, and it was a dynamic situation because Holtman got let go only a few months before Gene Smith's retirement. I want to go hire my own, candidate,
Right.
which I didn't necessarily get to do before. and it'll be easy for them to just cut bait with Diebler at that point because he's, as inexperienced as he is, and they'll just say it didn't work out. So he's got to hit it in every area on the head in order to avoid the scrutiny that not only just exists with the situation as the facts lay,
Hmm.
but also now what he has put on himself in the offseason relative to saying we just got to develop what we have to address the problems on this
Right.
team.
And I absolutely agree with that because it is, and it's almost like a self-inflicted thing for Ohio State. Like if I were Diebler, I'd honestly, I wouldn't be pissed. You got the job, but I would also be like, okay, I need support. You know what I mean? Like if you're gonna hire me here and say, all right, you're the dude, keep it rolling or whatever, keep these guys together, which he didn't really do over the course of the spring. Like he did in some respects, but not in all respects. He needs to have the resources to be able to do that. And like obviously a lot of this is on him, but like how serious is Ohio State and being competitive with the likes of a Dusty May, right? At Michigan. Like you that if that's the standard, because he's trying to turn that program around. They were awful last year. They were probably the worst team in the Big Ten. If you're looking at that and you see him turn it around faster than Diebler can turn it around for Ohio State, that's a problem. That's a big problem. You got to make sure you don't fall behind in terms of like recruiting and stature and results and all those things. So that's going to be a really interesting dynamic, and that's a great get. That's a great recruit. But I'm with you, man. Like you've got to be competing for the biggest recruits in the country, not necessarily landing all of these guys. Because I get it, you're not a blue blood. I mean, as much as we wish Ohio State was in basketball, it's not. But you gotta be throwing that money out there. You got to throw your weight around a little bit, and you got to give Diebler that support so he can do it.
Which not only, I mean, I brought up the point that Jones had Michigan on his short list. The other narrative surrounding that commitment was that he was apparently going to go to Rutgers, and that this was
Yeah,
apparently like at least according to journalists that were supposedly in the know, this was kind of like a last minute will they or won't they in terms of Jones wanted to go, but then Rutgers was, making a pretty considerable push. And obviously they're making a very heavy NIL investment relative to basketball of late with the recruiting success that they have had. They're trying to make a push to be more of a power player in the Big Ten. And Ohio State was kind of in a will they or won't they spot with Jones. The fact that they were as neutral as they apparently were on this recruit this late stage and were still able to retain that level of interest with the guy when he had such a push from not only Michigan but also an up and comer in Rutgers, and that late in the game they were still able to go to the guy despite not, I mean, it isn't from the perspective of a recruit, it's not great if you've been waiting on someone to commit to you the same way that you've indicated you want to commit to them, and they don't really make it apparent that they want you full-heartedly until the last, the 11th hour when you've got other good options on the table. The fact that the program was still able to throw its weight around like that, I don't want that to see a trend because they're going to miss out on talent more often than not because you're not going to necessarily have guys that are as enamored with Ohio State like that. But the fact that they were still able to do that, I think bodes well, at least in terms of the attractiveness of what Ohio State has to, if not necessarily recruits in general, at least the in-state recruits for the state of
right.
Ohio. So it makes me feel good relative to the talent situation that is here in the short term in the state of Ohio. I just wonder how if Diebler ends up being here longer than 2 or 3 years, and as we get further out, how is that going to translate on a national scale as Ohio State does try to once again establish itself as more of a blue blood in college
Yeah,
basketball, which there's still a long way to go.
yeah. That's
But
yeah. I think
wins like this are important, and the fact that they could still throw their weight around as they apparently did, despite not being, jumping in with both feet on a guy until the very last minute, I think is it speaks to the brand for the program being in a good place. you just don't want to see that become a pattern relative to the grand
Right.
scheme of things.
100%.
I don't think.
All right. So that's kind of the first part of our show. We want to get and ask us anything. But before we do that, we want to remind you that the Dubcast is sponsored by the Dry Goods Store at 11warriors.com, drygoods.11warriors.com. Shirts, hats, stickers. Check it out. Chris Lauterbach, you're probably familiar with Chris from the website. I'm privy to a really cool idea that he had for a new shirt, and I'm pretty excited about it. So I hope we end up are letting that come to fruition, because I thought that was pretty hilarious. So we'll
Oh, but you're not gonna
no, I gotta tease
You
it. We gotta tease
tease.
it.
Oh,
I will say it's Michigan related, and I enjoy it, at least as someone who is definitely in the target audience for it.
I love slanderous Michigan.
Who doesn't?
Merch?
Okay, so let's do the Ask Us Anything segment, our favorite part of the Dubcast. This first one here is from Kevin. He says, "Guys, have you ever thought about writing a book? I bet it would be funny." I don't know if you've ever read anything that I've written, Kevin. It would
I like the way you
yeah,
think, Kevin.
it probably would never be funny. I don't know that I could write something funny. Maybe put it in the dry goods store. I would buy it. I appreciate it. He just sent his second book to the publisher, so good on you, dude. That's pretty fantastic. Yeah, Kevin, you want to check out Kevin Sweeney, maybe look for it out in stores. I did some quick back of the napkin math when I saw this. So I've written for 11 Warriors since 2010. I've written basically at least one article a week, but usually more than that, every week for, that interval of time. And if you average it out to about 750 words per article, it comes to around like 500,000 plus words that I've written in the past, almost decade and a half. Your average novel is about, 100,000 to 150,000 words. So not that I've written a novel, but I feel I like volume wise, that seems like something that's doable for me. Now, whether I have the talent or imagination or skill, to actually do something like that, I'm not quite sure. I don't know that I could actually write something long form that way that people would actually want to write, or read rather. But maybe at some point, if I have the right idea and then I have the kind of time that it takes to invest in it, who knows? Maybe one day I'll do that. But I'm not sure what it would be about. I think it would probably be fiction rather than nonfiction, because that would, I don't know, I wouldn't be able to wrap my head around what I would need to do to do something like that.
I think I'm going to eventually, but
Okay.
do
you have a topic? Do you have
right
like something that you would want to like specifically write about?
I've got a couple different things in mind.
Tell me them so I can steal them, and then
no, I can't. Oh well, I wasn't going to tell you anyway, but now that I know you're going to steal them.
Well, you know what's funny is that
no, it's just pretty. It's like serious subject matter,
Okay.
but it's pretty niche in terms of like what I've been through. So I think that it would speak to a very understated, unserved audience.
But that's good though. That's cool.
I have plenty of living left to do in order to make that more interesting.
That's cool though.
So.
There's always, obviously I work in a library. I'm a youth learning specialist, so I don't get super into all the whys and wherefores of the types of books that we have in the library, but I know a little bit about it, and there's an audience for like anything. And I think sometimes there's a lot of people who don't get the kind of attention that they deserve, or at least subjects or topics that don't get the kind of attention that they deserve. So I always like it when people delve into topics that are kind of underappreciated, or at least not written enough about. So I kind of like that. I think that's cool.
Yeah,
okay,
I'll be doing that. I will not be writing any Ohio State books though. Like
I feel like every book about Ohio State has already been written. Like
I've hit the peak in terms of the like media prominence that I want out of the work that I've done to get to this point. The fact that I have a platform to espouse my ridiculous opinions about this thing that I care very much about without having to be a semi-serious journalist about it is like the perfect comfort zone.
Yeah, no,
I get
I know
to
exactly what you're
spit
saying.
as many hot takes as I want, and
we should just make
nobody can stop me.
We should make a book that's literally just
reason.
transcripts of Dubcast shows, and then just and dare people to buy it and read it. All right, so this is from our good friend Alvin. He says, "Happy belated July 4th. Outside of the hot dog eating contest, what other American food/drink contest should we be hosting?" So the hot dog contest, I mean, first of all, it was missing the goat, right? Like they had a little bit of I guess Joey Chestnut had some beef, no pun intended, with Nathan's, and because
But
yeah, because he endorsed a vegan alternative, I guess, and they're like, "Well, you can't attend our hot dog eating contest," and I don't know, I forget what
so he said that's fine. I'll just live stream myself
yeah, and
dominating the
Kobayashi,
field
yeah,
from my
that's
house.
right.
No, not even the Kobayashi thing. He just like went on social media like, okay, I'm gonna eat the same amount of hot dogs that all those guys did at 10 minutes in 5 minutes.
That rules. What a flex.
And
He's
yeah,
the
that's
best.
we all know who the real champ
Of
is.
course. And they do have like other contests. Like they'll have, I think one was like who can drink a gallon of lemonade the fastest or something like that, which in of itself is an insane feat. Just to hold a gallon of liquid inside your body at one time makes no sense to me. I don't know how people are able to do that without immediately throwing up. Um, the hot dog is kind of this quintessential American food item, right? Like, and you immediately associate it with cookouts and the Fourth of July and things like that. I think to compete with that, you would have to do some other seasonal thing. So you should have like. I feel like you could do burgers or whatever, but you're really kind of just trying to steal hot dog's thunder. I think what you need to do is you need to base it on holidays. So like how many like turkey legs can you consume in 10 minutes? That kind of thing for like Thanksgiving, or how many, I don't know, like how many gallons or liters of beer can you put down like on St. Patrick's Day or something like that? Like make it like holiday related, and then just go to town. Like, I don't know, Christmas ham. Like just how much ham, how many cubic miles of ham can you consume in a certain period of time? Like that's, you got to pick a holiday. You got to pick a time where everybody's already gorging themselves on food so they can then be impressed by other people gorging themselves even further on that same food that you're already eating. That's what I think. Anyway, pumpkin
It's
pie, right?
tough.
Pumpkin pie. And
I've never been fond of pie eating
why
contests.
is that?
Like the hot dog, I don't know. Actually I do know. It's that it it's
They
one
seem
it's one
smug.
thing.
They just seem so smug.
No, it's not that. It's that it's one thing to have to watch a person gorge themselves,
Sure.
but with the pie eating contest, I hate that you witness the aftermath and that their
Oh yeah,
faces
like
are
two
like
thirds of it is on
entirely
their
painted with the
face.
jam.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
I get it.
that's like I don't know. That's why the hot dog eating contest I think is at least tolerable, is because it's all, it can all get in the portal very efficiently.
So you
You
know that
know,
it's actually inside their bodies as opposed to
right?
on, yeah, out on the outside of their body. I get it. I get it. That makes
It's
sense.
tough. It's tough. It's tough to beat hot dogs, I
It
think,
really
for that
is.
reason in terms of the appropriate food.
It's hard to
I
beat
mean, I'm
hot
trying to
dogs
think of other
because
ones.
it's the perfect food because you can eat it quickly. Everybody kind of has a vantage point. Like everybody kind of has a point of reference for eating too many hot dogs. And so you kind of already know, like, all right, I ate 4 hot dogs at once. That was a problem. And then you can kind of like gauge on what other people have to do. With other stuff, like people don't, with Thanksgiving, I guess, you'll eat a bunch of stuff, but you don't eat a lot of one thing, if that makes sense. Like you're kind of just like sampling and nibbling on a bunch of different things. And so I think hot dogs really is the perfect food for a food contest. I agree with that.
In my head, I want to say ice cream, but that's going to present the same issue that I have with the pie eating
Yeah, and ice cream
contest.
is weird because I don't like anything that's like kind of liquidy. It almost feels cheap. Like hot dog eating contest is like that's work. You know what I mean? Like you got to chew the whole thing and eat the bun, whatever. Ice cream, it feels like you just kind of slurp it, like you're just inhaling it. Like that doesn't seem like a challenge to me. Like it's just how much you can like stuff in your stomach. Like that doesn't
I
seem.
want to say French fries, but you'd have to call them fries because we can't
No,
we can't
no,
have
yeah,
any other
not on America's
nationalities
birthday.
shoehorned into these
Of course
American
not.
celebrations of eating food.
I agree with that.
Um,
I would
yeah,
make it
I
holiday based and then find one specific thing and then just go to town on it. That's my take on it. Um
I'm not as big on the turkey leg thing because I feel like you should have to eat the whole turkey. You know,
you have to like catch, you have to slaughter and then pluck and then cook and then eat as many turkeys as you can. All right, real quick. So this is from Devyesh. Uh Dear wonderful and handsome Dubcast team. I really appreciate.
He's so nice
I
to us.
know.
He always
He
compliments us
really
when he
is.
writes
He
us.
really is.
Thank you.
Last year, Brian Hartline got promoted to co-offensive coordinator. The talk around it was the next step to him becoming a head coach in a few years, which, and perhaps required promotion so he didn't leave Ohio State. Now it seems like he's kind of taking a demotion, essentially, with Chip Kelly coming back in. Is Hartline's mindset more along the lines of, look at Larry Johnson, you're going to be a great positional coach for the next 40 years, or I'm going to have to leave Ohio State to become a head coach? Here's what I think. I think Brian Hartline is looking real hard at the NFL, and that's where he
Yeah.
ultimately wants to be. I
Yes.
don't think it's him wanting to be a head coach in the college ranks. I don't think it's him wanting to be a
No.
positional coach in college ranks. I think it's him wanting to be an offensive coordinator or a head coach at the NFL level.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
that's going to happen eventually for him. I think he really enjoys doing what he's doing because clearly he's, the best at it in the country. But I also think that his goals long term are, I want to be an NFL guy, which is totally cool. Like, I think that's totally fine. I think he realizes that he's learning a lot at this level. And maybe he doesn't, quite want to do it yet. I mean, he's still a really young guy, right? Like, it's not like,
Yeah, and for however much success he actually had in the NFL, Chip Kelly is someone with a lot
yep,
of NFL coaching
right.
experience. So I'm sure he's looking at this as an opportunity to draw on,
Mm-hmm.
what this guy does in terms of a staff management thing for taking that on to the next
100%.
level when he eventually leaves Ohio State for there. So I
Yeah.
don't I don't think he looks at it as, a demotion or a biding time thing at all. I think it's much more of a this
Yeah.
is
What
this is an
skills can
opportunity
I,
for me to learn
right.
so that I can apply what I get now to what I really want in the future, which is a healthy way to look at pretty much any, I think, professional situation you come into where you're getting a new superior, or just new people that you're working with in your department. So
Yeah, 100%. I absolutely agree with that. And, enjoy it while it lasts at Ohio State because I don't know that he'll be here super long. I mean, if I have zero inside information. I occasionally have.
well, if the guy is going to keep losing receiving
Yeah,
recruits
that's
to
right. That's
Oregon,
right.
I obviously don't want him
Yeah,
around
if he
very
can't
long.
compete with Phil Knight, he can get the
Settling
hell
for
out of
the
here.
Bogpedin Millers
That's
of the
right. That's
world.
right. If if he allows another 5-star to go to another college, get his ass out of here. Real quick, I got this email from S.A. Hassan, and this is not an ask us anything question, but it was sent to me from GoFundMe, and this is really interesting. So and actually I it's unusual that I get stuff like this, but it was kind of
What is
awesome.
this? Solicit us anything?
Well, in this case, I'm cool with it because this is actually
Oh my
about
god.
Hunter Armstrong's family wanting to
Oh,
attend the Paris Olympic Games. They weren't able to go to the Tokyo Games that Hunter Armstrong
yeah.
participated in because there were so many restrictions related to COVID. So
Yeah.
they want to be able to go to Paris and cheer their son on, hopefully to win more Olympic medals. And they are not
You're
able
going
to
to
do that.
watch
So
him swim in a river of piss and poop
no, this will be
over
in
in
a pool,
Paris.
George. I don't know if you watch the Olympics very often. That you
Oh
do
no, they're all the water sports are happening in the river.
in the
You didn't
River
hear
Sen.
about that?
Yeah, that's right. No, Hunter Armstrong will be inoculated and fine. I'm sure everything will be okay. But anyway, it's apparently really difficult to see all of the events that he might participate in. So there's a GoFundMe for his family to help them attend and be there and be able to cheer him on. So if you see that, if you got it, definitely consider throwing a couple of bucks to his family so they can cheer him on in Paris. I think that's awesome. I also think it's insane that that's not just covered. Like what the hell are we talking? Like I know this is the case, and I know the IOC, the United States Olympic Committee, sponsors so many different athletes and all these other things. But come on, man, like you gotta be able to get their families to these events. I just don't understand why that's not baked into the cost of some of this stuff. But yeah, help his family out. That's freaking awesome, and I hope that they're able to get there and cheer Hunter on because that rules. Okay, so that's Ask Us Anything. Couple more items before we get out of here. We had on the site a pretty cool interview with President Ted Carter. A lot of things that he was talking about. A couple interesting things from this. So first of all, he remains pretty confident that Ohio State will be able to stay at 36 varsity sports. They do have a $10 million budget shortfall that became kind of publicized last week, which, I feel like that's the kind of thing that Ohio State should be able to make up fairly easily, but they're definitely looking for other sources of revenue for that. But I don't know, man. Do you think there will be able to stay at 36? Because like that's really I just don't know that that's gonna. I know Ohio State's better positioned than pretty much any other athletic department to do that, but I don't know. That seems like a tall task, given the kind of
No,
revenue
I
sharing.
mean, it sounds ambitious, but as we spoke about when the our the subject got brought up for the NCAA settlement that created the framework for schools directly getting to participate in NIL now as opposed to having to lean on collectives.
Mhm.
It just isn't realistic for an athletic department of Ohio State size relative to how much support the revenue sports in football and basketball like demand for 36 athletic teams to keep going. Maybe they'll get to keep more than we originally thought, but I do think that, I mean, especially given what you just said, $10 million shortfall. I mean, okay, that's 1 year. If that becomes a recurring issue, there's just going to inevitably have to be
Right.
cuts. So I think it's more of just a and Big Ted, I hope you're not a Dubcast fan listening to this because I know we had some interesting commentary for Chris. But he obviously isn't. If he had heard our Chris Pan show, he wouldn't have spoken to Dan and Andy last week. But if word does get back to President Slapshot, as you enjoy
Yeah.
calling him, uh, I do think that is a little bit of politicking in terms of just, trying to
Keep everybody
say what is
calm.
going to make people happy,
Yeah.
right? I think that long term, something is going to have to give. But it will be interesting to see what goes just because of how much success Ohio State has across sports. Um, so I can't really think of anything in my head right now where they're not, consistently competitive in that would be immediately a candidate for the chopping block. Like I would hope the riflery team gets to stick around because that's been, probably the strongest dynasty at Ohio State for the last 20
Well,
years.
them and synchronized
um,
swimming, which of course, Illinois
right.
Warriors.
Well, I don't know if sink swim is technically, I think that's a club
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, I think you're
I'm
right.
not sure what the situation with
Because
that
there's only,
is.
I mean, there's only a handful of synchronized swimming teams across the country,
Right.
but Ohio State has by far the best. So
Yeah,
let's not
for
forget
sure.
that. But yeah, I understand what
But
you're
in
saying.
terms of programs directly supported by the athletic department, I think I don't know if they quite fit within that. I could be wrong. But yeah, it I do think we are gonna see some cuts eventually. Maybe not as many as we were anticipating, but yeah, I do think that it's unrealistic to assume that, especially given how many other uh, high level schools have already started having to make cuts to their own athletic
Mhm.
programs. If there's really this much of a shortfall for what is supposed to be like the highest revenue generating athletic department in the country,
Which it is
I
the high,
mean,
but still, $10 million is $10 million, right? Like it's not nothing.
right,
Um,
right. So if that becomes a recurring shortfall, not just like a one
mhm,
off 1 year thing, you gotta adjust the balance sheet
right.
somehow, and the easiest way to do it is to eliminate programs.
100%. Yeah. So we'll see how that goes. But I'm with you. I think a lot of this is just trying to calm, like calm everybody down. It's okay. We'll be fine. But you're right. If it's a recurring thing, I don't know what else you do. I think that's kind of, the logical step. Last thing, real.
Maybe that's why they didn't have enough money to invest in a search committee for a commencement speaker.
No, he was already picked. They didn't need a search committee. They knew who they wanted. So last thing, just real quick. This is something that only matters to me, but the state of Ohio is about to approve. So it passed. It passed the House of Representatives. Okay, this bit of legislation. It has to go through the Senate and then to John Kasich. Good Lord, not his desk, but the desk of the current governor, Mike DeWine. It's got to go to his desk, but they have said that Ohio should officially have a state fish. We have not had an official state fish. Unofficial state fish, I guess, was kind of the walleye, and that is what people have proposed to be the official state fish.
Which for a state that features flammable rivers in its lore is, just unacceptable.
That's right. That it's you got to have some kind of like hardy fish that survived, the burning of the Cuyahoga. So anyway,
the pollution.
Yeah.
The state fish is that three-eyed fish from
The Simpsons. Blinky. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
the only reason why this matters to me is because about 10, 12 years ago, I wrote like a whole thing ranking the top, state whatevers of the Big Ten. And I found out that Ohio does not have a state fish.
Most elite fish.
Yeah, and I was really upset about that. And I suggested that the walleye would be a really good replacement. And lo and behold, finally, years later. And by the way, I made a Vine of me yelling at the state house, yelling that we need a state fish. So clearly the message got through, and now hopefully, finally,
which is something you'd expect from like DJ.
No,
Burns,
I know. Oh, yes, that's right. No, I screamed at him and I honked my horn a bunch. But they, like I said, they got the freaking message. And hopefully now Ohio will have that state fish, so I'll be very excited.
Okay, but here's my thing: the walleye is already Minnesota's state fish, and you had them ranked as your top actual state. Like, you had them as the most elite fish.
Yeah.
Is there not? If you're gonna wait this long to declare a state animal, should you not pick an animal that is specifically indigenous to the state?
What would
instead of just lazily adopting a species that has migrated beyond the borders of Ohio?
Well, you know what?
Do you know of any Ohio specific fish?
No, I don't. I know that when I was a kid, I caught a lot of bluegill and crappie. I don't know that I would want to pick either of those. Those are panfish, and they are, they're not particularly impressive. I want like something that's a part of Ohio's culture. I think walleye, especially in the northern part of the state, definitely fits the bill. Sturgeon, I don't like sturgeon. I don't know.
There's a fish called an Ohio lamprey. Why is that not the state fish?
Do you know what a lamprey?
The state's name.
No. I don't want some sucker.
I don't know anything about fish. Like you said, this is your topic.
No, I do. Lamprey are sucker fish. They attach to the sides of other fish. That's a weak choice.
The Tippecanoe darter.
The Tippecanoe darter.
Come on. Yeah.
All right. Well, that actually kind of rules. So I'm looking it up, and I'm wasting time.
The spotted gar is a rare and endangered species only found in Lake Erie in Ohio. What would help raise awareness for an endangered species? Make it the state animal.
Okay.
Get out of here with your walleyes. You hold out for this long. You yell at the state
Hang on a
house,
second. I'm looking at the Wikipedia.
And you
for the
settle for a walleye?
I'm looking at the Wikipedia for the spotted gar. It looks a lot. It's not just in Ohio. It's all over the place.
I'm just looking at whatever AI garbage Google
doesn't know what the hell it's talking about.
So of course it's probably
the Tippecanoe
wrong.
darter is like an inch long. So yeah, forget that. No.
Yeah, it's a small, efficient fish.
The walleye is a good fish.
I don't know if you realize this or not, but we support a school whose mascot is a tiny poisonous nut.
No, it's the tree. It's the entire tree. It's not just the nut.
Oh, okay. What are we, Stanford?
Yes, the Stanford. No, we're a better school than Stanford. That's something that I.
What? How is Brutus shaped again? Will you refresh my memory?
The beginning of the tree. It's implying it's the start of knowledge and the growth of knowledge, and then you see that's why the leaves are attached to it, because it's not just the Buckeye nut; it's the entirety of it. They put leaves on the helmet, right? It's the whole thing. It's the whole package.
Could have fooled me.
Okay, so that's the Dubcast for this week.
Hold on. Apparently, there is a catfish.
I knew you do this.
I don't know what it is.
I knew you do this.
But it says Ohio has practically no endemic species.
Okay, well there you go.
But there is a catfish.
What's it called?
That is
Better be a good looking catfish.
The brindled madtum.
Brindled, what? Madtum? What?
Yes.
How do you spell that? M-A-D? Mad Tom.
Brindled madtom. Mad
Mad
Tom.
Tom. All right. Eastern United States. It's all over the place. It's not in Ohio.
The brindled
Yeah, it
madtum.
says it's all the way down Louisiana, all the way down the Mississippi.
Okay.
Lake Pontchartrain.
Well, I could be wrong. Now that I'm looking further into this article, apparently the endemic, like, I don't know what kingdom, phylum, whatever. How do they teach you in biology? You go further down that line, and there was a descendant of that species called the
Oh, the
Sciotomadtum. That,
Scioto.
guess
Okay.
what? So that should have been the state
Yeah.
fish, but it went extinct
Oh,
because guess why it went extinct?
because I don't know why.
Because of Cleveland and its dirty rivers. That is why there has been no state fish. It's because of
'Cause we
dirty,
killed it.
stinky, flammable Cleveland.
Well, there you go.
Just goes to show
Goes to
you that
you. Dang. R.I.P.
Cincinnati's better.
All right. Sure. Yeah, right. I don't know if you've been to the Ohio River. I'm just going to tell you. I don't know that Cleveland has any kind of monopoly.
Can I tell you something? The river that runs through Columbus, I think, is like the least prideful part of Ohio on that like entire, because I would like wasp past that thing to go to whether you're going to the Shot or like the drama, the theater building at Ohio State is, that's like right along the
That's
river.
why
And
it's
I'd be
the
like,
muddy banks of the Olentangy. It's not the
this
beautiful.
is gross. Yeah. This is not a selling point for living around here.
You know what? The river skate's pretty nice, but the river itself, you're like, I don't know. I see people like kayaking in it. I'm like, man, I don't know. Anyway, that's the Dubcast this week. I'm sure George will look up other fish to harass me about. But I still think,
or you can submit them to ask us anything.
Them to ask us anything and harass me about it there. That's fine too. Whatever, I'll ignore them. All right. Anyway, until we'll keep talking about Ohio State stuff. More recruits, I'm sure, for whatever reason, because we've had recruits every week of the off season. And more state fish, sure, whatever. But until then, I'm Johnny.
I'm
and
George.
we'll see you next time.
Take care, folks.